General Mohan, thank you so much for joining me here on day one at AUSA. You have a lot going on at Army Materiel Command these days. A lot of people don't know that AMC has the ability to send out depot-level maintainers all over the world to do depot-level maintenance at the tactical edge. So talk about what that work entails and the benefits of doing this type of work as opposed to bringing things back to the depots.
Yeah, so at any given time, we can have between 600 and 1,000 people from our organic industrial base, America's Army's organic industrial base, out and about across the Army doing the business of the Army, generating readiness. And it can be anything from ammunition experts. It can be, we are actually moving some specific ammunition right now that requires some accompaniment. We recently had a team in Korea that went to Korea and fixed a CH-47, significant cost savings, not only in dollars and time, vice having to evac the helicopter back to the United States. And then we have depot teams that are routinely embedded in our heavy combat brigades that are doing specific maintenance to get them at the maximum state of readiness before they do a deployment, a CTC, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, the beauty of that is that not only does the unit get extra toolboxes and extra labor, but really what they get is training. Because our depot maintainers are the best in the world, and when they work side by side with soldiers, there is an inherent transfer of training and skill from our folks to their folks. And then plus, it's a really good payback for our folks because they get to see why it's important, what their purpose is.
Talk about the cost difference of, say, flying a Chinook back to, Corpus Christi to get fixed versus sending somebody out there.
$2 million versus $200,000.
Wow. Okay.
And that's not unusual.
Yeah.
We recently had a microcell thunderstorms went through Fort Carson, and we picked and chose which helicopters, and only one ended up having to come back to the depot. But we sent depot capability to two different places to fix helicopters that otherwise normally would have to come back to depot.
So I know that you are beginning to expand this effort a little bit beyond where you are with depot level maintaining at the tactical edge. Can you talk about what you're doing there?
Yeah, so it's really the integration of the entire system and to formalize our depot maintenance capability at the forward tactical edge. Remember, deliver ready combat formation is what the Chief of Staff of the Army's told us to do. It's about that. It's about formalizing both our capability and the training and our workforce to make sure they're expeditionary, that we have the right kind of equipment that's mobile, that we can move the right kind of equipment. But then we get the opportunity to integrate in other concepts and processes. For example, learning how we better integrate advanced manufacturing. For example, learning how we would do telemaintence, because we've got a significant effort for telemaintance in support of some of our international partners. How do we integrate that into our Army to make sure that we're capturing all the goodness that comes out of that, so that we're prepared to do it if we had to go to conflict?
Right. I believe there was a demo on telemaintence this morning. Elsewhere on the showroom floor. Did you get a chance to check that out? Can you talk a little bit more specifically about what are some of the things that you have accomplished through telemaintance? I mean, this started in Europe in response to needing to repair things coming out of Ukraine. Right. So talk a little bit about what are some of the accomplishments you've made as this has become a very robust capability.
Yeah, it's for our partners. It's been a game changer, absolute game changer, because of the speed that we integrated in U.S. equipment. And that has led to not only our ability to continue that telemaintance, but also allowed us to tailor and focus training that we've provided to the same partners. And that's physical hands-on training. And then we have a network built so that they can follow on and do not only additional training, but additional over-the-shoulder help. Now we've brought that back to the big Army, and we've recently executed a couple of CTC rotations where we integrated in concepts of telemaintance, which allowed us to cut the number of boots on the ground. They're still out there, but we purposely did not let them go to the point of impact. We forced them to use the telemaintence concept, and it allowed us to cut that by a significant number of man hours, which in a highly mobile, highly distributed battlefield, it's going to allow us to generate readiness.
Absolutely. The Army embarked a year ago to remove excess equipment from the force. It was one of General George's major initiatives when he took over as chief. So AMC has led this effort. So talk about how that has gone and what you've learned through this process.
Yeah, so I think the one is it's gone wonderfully. If we're not at 400,000 pieces of equipment right now, we're really, really close because the number is continuing. I mean, it's continuing. The other piece is there's been a visible demonstration to our soldiers, to our property accountability, our 92 Yankees, and our company commanders that, hey, we're listening to you, that we understand that you have more equipment than you need, and we're coming to get it. And so we've been scraping that equipment. And it's not just Compo 1. We've expanded it to Compo 2 and Compo 3. Right. And we now have it integrated in with Forces Command in particular, who run the Army Readiness and Synchronization Conference, the ASARC, or Synchronization Readiness Conference, yeah. And so it's integrated in. So we baked it into the unit's training calendars because we have to have commander buy-in for it to work very valuable, at its best state. The other piece that it's really reinforced to me is that, look, we do a lot of work for fieldings. We've got to do work to integrate defieldings, as I call them, because we're really good at giving soldiers equipment, but we're not very good at the process of discipline, process of taking soldiers' equipment back from them, and that's how we end up with these little pockets of, or in some cases, really big pockets. And the last thing I'll say to this one is that between our efforts and then the transforming contact efforts, we have seen a significant reduction in the amount of lift required to deploy brigades. And so there's a real strategic mobility and cost savings, quite frankly, benefit to that.
Wow, that's very interesting. I know you're also beginning another reform effort, the central issue facility reform. So what does this entail, and what are the goals with this reform?
Yeah, so it's not good enough just to take their excess equipment. We need to take the soldiers' excess kit, because we've 20 years of war. Soldiers have, every time I go to speak to PCC, I'm like, okay, fess up. Who's got more than one helmet? And everybody's like, me. Well, we need to get that excess kit out and either dispose of it if it's obsolete, or get it back into the supply system so we can feed the front end of it, which is our retained issue program for our soldiers coming out of the training pipeline. Because what we want to do is give them a set of equipment that they carry from duty station to duty station. But we don't want to have all this accumulated equipment that they're moving, because that costs generally about $1 a pound for us to move, our family's stuff. And so we want to get as much stuff as that out of it. Okay. And then that will allow us with retained issue to streamline our CIF operation, our central issue facility operations at our installation. So some, like Redstone Arsenal IM, eventually that CIF will be gone. And it'll be all a storefront. We have 2 major distribution hubs, one in Austin, Texas, the other in Lansing, Michigan, that can rapidly overnight ship stuff. At our troop installations, we will go to a skinny down menu of stuff. So helmets, rucksacks, just the basic gear. And so we'll have a menu of that. So if Private Mohan loses his helmet, right, I can go with my supply sergeant just like normal, go to the CIF storefront and pick up a helmet. Okay. If my house burns down and I lose everything, the supply sergeant will go online and through a much improved automation system that we'll field in January, they will be able to go online and order the entire replacement kit for Private Mohan, and it'll get shipped to the storefront, and then they'll go pick it up. So we have proven our ability to rapidly move equipment around the Army. And so this is just really the next evolution of both R2E and also updating our distribution processes.
Okay. Well, what are the benefits to having, just larger repository places and the smaller storefronts? Is it, greater oversight of everything, since it's kind of one of two very large places for the most part. What's the thinking behind that design?
So at the at our facilities, and like the one in Austin, I was down there not too long ago, we also we've incorporated renovation. So stuff that would normally be washed out locally comes back and gets repaired. Guidehouse or Lighthouse for the Blind does it, and it's a wonderful facility. Not only in the way they do business, but why they're doing it, their purpose for being there, training, etc. The other piece is it allows us to see ourselves better in an environment where we don't necessarily want to give every soldier Arctic equipment, that we can move. So if we deploy the 82nd to the Arctic environment, we can move that equipment there to marry up with them, or move it to Fort Liberty before they move, where we would normally, have stockpiles of it sitting all around the Army.
Okay.
Really helps with modernization.
Okay.
And we can see ourselves.
Okay. Speaking of that, how has some of the predictive analysis work that you've been doing helped planning for logistics and sustainment in even the most challenging theaters like the Pacific? And how is it helping the Army think about what it needs to put forward on the battlefield and where?
Yeah, I think it gets to the point where it allows us to see ourselves. And so, for example, we are working through some courses of action to do some equipment repositioning. Not only some standing stockpiles, but what do we need to place in the future? And we've built models that allow us to do real-time movement data is in there, cost is in there. We can put labor type factors in there, and we can run a scenario in about 15 minutes, where it used to take hours, if not days, to run those different types of scenarios. And that's just one example. The other example is that we have a program called the Operational Readiness Program, where we're going to basically follow a unit. We're going to inject some of the depot capability in on a very deliberate manner. We are going to inject some different concepts for maintenance. So basically use data to harvest the vehicles that are consuming the most man hours and the most dollars, and give them a replacement vehicle. And then from a data standpoint, we're going to follow that unit throughout their entire life cycle of this deployment iteration. And then we're going to make predictions about what we think they're going to use from all the way down to the NSN level for Class 9. How many engines, how many transmissions, and then we're going to grade our paper on the backside of it. We think it's going to work very well, but the other thing is, look, we're not afraid to fail. We're going to try it, and if it doesn't work, this is transformation in contact.
Absolutely.
The ethos of, hey, put it in the hands of soldiers, let them work with it, and then don't be afraid to fail.
Okay, all right. The Army's done some really interesting work at Rock Island on additive manufacturing and 3D printing parts. So highlight some of the lines of effort here and how you're working on bringing this capability into even small units at the tactical edge.
Yeah, so just a couple of examples. One, we'd love to there. It's really cool. We are 3D printing titanium parts. And I mean, it's incredibly complex. We are also using 3D printing and additive manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, to change the way that we do current forgings and castings. So processes that would take days, if not weeks, to build wooden forms, to build sand forms, now we're 3D printing those forms, and we can do them in hours. And we have demonstrated examples, like real examples, of how we're delivering parts faster, particularly complex castings and forgings. So that's one piece. The other piece is we have to build a network. We have capability at Rock Island, but we also have capability at Letterkenny, at Anniston, at the depot I commanded a long time ago in Tooele, Utah, and so we have that. Plus, we are also seeing it pop up in CENTCOM. 3ID has an innovation center. 82nd's got a CASCOM has got some stuff. So we're going to host a war game in the coming future, where we bring everybody together, and we baseline who has what capability, and then we show people how to get to our digital repository, where we are uploading files of stuff that we are building. But the trick is going to be that we allow people to access it to the capability that they have. because just because we can 3D print a titanium part, I mean that's not. It's not everywhere, right? And so we want to make sure that units don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
And then they know what we have. We have the world's largest 3D printer at Rock Island, and it can print a hull of a vehicle.
Wow.
It is that big, and so we want to connect everybody together. So that's why we're going to do this war game, which will allow us to get to the future where we position this kind of capability on the battlefield where it makes sense. But then everybody's interconnected, so we can rapidly print parts to coatings, finish work coatings, and then ship them to the point of need. But we've got to attack the distribution system, and this is where we see autonomous delivery on the battlefield really helping us attack and be able to move those parts to the point of need.
Very interesting.
It is. It's fascinating.
So AMC came out with a strategy on modernizing the organic industrial base several years ago. Much of that you've been able to accelerate due to supplemental funding as we continue to replenish things sent to Ukraine. So how has that supplemental funding allowed you to move more quickly? What are some of the things that you've been able to accomplish?
So with the great support of the Army leadership and Congress, in 23 we invested over $2 billion. Last year, this last fiscal year, $1.5 billion. A lot of it was focused particularly on 155. Mm-hmm. We've gone from 14,000 to 40,000 and are driving towards 55,000 rounds a month, and that has not been easy. But now, in other places, we are continuing on our disciplined process of modernization of power distribution, water lines, hardening our buildings, for example, buying new machinery. The human capital strategy. This has all been, and we have a very disciplined process. The challenge for us is to make sure that we are investing our resources on those things that is coming out of industry that we're going to need to support, because we just can't buy machines to buy machines. We need to buy machines that we know are going to be necessary to support the future warfighter, and so that's the hard part. And we're closely partnering with Futures on that so that we can see the requirements better. And the last thing is, it's not only machines, but look, we have to do the same thing for facilities. We have the Installation Management Command. We capture requirements. We got to make sure that we're fully articulating those requirements so we're building the right kind of facilities.
Absolutely. Well, you have so many interesting things going on at your command. I always look forward to talking to you and look forward to it again in the future, and maybe a trip to Rock Island as well.
Hey, open invitation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jen.
right, Secretary Wormuth, you need no introduction. Thank you for joining me here at our booth on day one of AUSA. I'm kind of losing track of time. I'm sure you are too. Wonderful speech this morning. Wanted to dive in and talk first about the threat environment. You're seeing it change. We're watching in Ukraine. We're watching what's going on in the Middle East. What are some of your big takeaways in terms of how the threat is evolving over this past year and how that's influencing some of the things you're looking at?
Well, I think a couple of things really, Jen, are most notable to me. The first is sort of the number of challenges that we have simultaneously. You know, last year when we were here, we were probably focused significantly on what was going on with Ukraine. Now, obviously, the CENTCOM theater is once again, very busy and very volatile. And I think the other thing that's become more clear since a year ago is what I would call the sort of occasional pragmatic cooperation between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Again, not all four all together all the time, but in different combinations. I think all four of those countries have an interest in making life difficult for the United States. That's one thing they share. And I think that dynamic has become more evident in the past year.
How are those shifts in threats and adversary capabilities influencing how the Army prioritizes its modernization efforts? Are some of those shifting or causing a rethinking or reshuffling of focus when it comes to modernization plans, or even how the Army will build formations in the future?
I think what it's really emphasizing to me again is, particularly with a flat top line, we have just got to do everything possible to get the most bang for the buck. I think, any of our individual modernization portfolios still make sense, are still relevant, but it's about finding opportunities to bring programs to the left where we can. It's about pushing ourselves even harder to identify perhaps programs of record of a few years that maybe aren't as purpose-built for the future, and making tough decisions about those.
Yeah, and we've seen that, in very recent history here with the budget, you had to pivot on the extended range artillery cannon system. That obviously that requirement isn't going away. You're finding other solutions. You've canceled the future attack reconnaissance aircraft as you reassess what aviation is going to look like and the balance of unmanned and manned. So we're seeing that. What are some of your observations when it comes to the Transforming in Contact initiative that you and the chief have been spearheading over the past year, and how that is helping to inform building formations as well?
Yeah, I think, I like to put Transforming in Contact into context, and we're really looking at Army transformation in three different timeframes. We have the sort of beyond the FIDIP, looking, to 2040, and we're doing a lot of great work with our warfighting concept. We have sort of that middle time period, which is the 5-year defense program, sort of 3 to 7 years from now. And then we have the immediate time period of the next year or two. And to my comment about our flat top line and wanting to get the most bang for the buck, what we're using Transforming in Contact to do is really help us figure out, with things that we have right now, perhaps in small numbers, or with opportunities that commercial off-the-shelf systems present, how can we experiment with that, see which systems are promising, maybe make adjustments to our MTO, our tables of equipment, and also learn about new tactics, perhaps, to use some of these capabilities in a different way. And so one example is the 2101, one of the 3 brigades that's in the current initiative, basically put a bunch of, I think they're called Raspberry Pi emitters, it's an electromagnetic spectrum device, on a bunch of different quadcopters and sent it up, flew the quadcopters out in multiple places all around JRTC at Fort Johnson in Louisiana, and used it to basically make it harder for the OPFOR to find where the brigade TOC was. And that's just, one example. It's a new tactic. But I think that's an example of the kinds of things we're learning from the Transforming in Contact initiative.
Yeah, so even from the air, you can hide on the ground. In your speech, you highlighted ways to go faster when it comes to acquisition of new capabilities to be ahead of adversaries. And we've talked about Agile funding. How might that expand, following FY26? What are maybe some of the other areas you'd like to try? I know you haven't even gotten out with this budget where you'll be prioritizing flexible funding for counter UAS, and electronic warfare capabilities. But I'd love a sense of where you think that's going. And then also, has the Army made good headway in working with Congress to try to figure out how you're going to maintain a level of oversight that works for both of you?
Yeah, I would say, before talking about sort of what new areas we might expand Agile funding to address, we have to focus on figuring out with our colleagues in Congress, can we make Agile funding mechanisms that work for both us and Congress. And I will say, I do think we are making good headway with folks on the Hill. First of all, I would note there's very strong support from OSD for this initiative. General George and I talked with the Deputy Secretary and a number of the senior undersecretaries recently, and I think they are all very much behind us and see the promise of this. We've had conversations both with members, particularly on the appropriations committees, but also on the authorizing committees, as well as several clerks and professional staff members. And I think there is more opportunity than I would have thought for this a year ago. And I think that's for two reasons. One, all sides see what a dangerous environment we're in. And two, all sides see how rapidly technology is expanding. So I think if we can figure out how to adjust some of the financial management regulations internal to the department, and if we can reassure Congress that they can have access in real time to changes that we may be making amongst how we're spending the money, we may very well get support from Congress to do this. And then I think keeping it targeted on those three areas first, build trust around the Agile funding mechanism. And after that, I think, we'll see if there's opportunity to expand it to other portfolios.
Well, that will be exciting to see. I feel like the network or some of these other spots could benefit from that as well. You also mentioned building requirements for producibility. Obviously, we're seeing Ukraine be able to build the drones extremely quickly, and obviously we have to build to our own standards. And but talk about how this wasn't really done well in the past and the issues that the Army experienced as a result. And what are some of the ways you're approaching building requirements that take producibility into account and how that will benefit the Army going forward?
I think I would describe it as a matter of emphasis. In the past, I think, again, perhaps when we didn't feel as much of the sense of urgency as we feel today, requirements really emphasize all of the different capabilities that we want. They put a lot of emphasis on aspirations. And with what producibility and technology readiness, I think putting greater emphasis on those two dimensions and requirements is really about saying we need to be able to build the capabilities that we want more quickly, rather than 4 years or more. We need to be able to build it in 2 years or less. And related to that, perhaps that means that as we develop requirements, we need to place more emphasis on technologies that are relatively closer to fielding. And again, that's not going to make sense everywhere. Energetics are a great example. We really need to kind of make a a leap in terms of what we need for energetics, and that may take time, and we should take the time to get the results we want. But in other areas, it may just be smarter to look at technologies that are closer to being ready to go.
Okay. Shifting gears just a little bit, air defense, that's a big topic right now. What are some of the ways you are planning or thinking about bolstering air defense capabilities for the Joint Force now? Up-tempo has long been an issue in the Patriot Force, So is the Army seeing ways to move capability that's currently in prototyping, for instance, the lower tier air missile defense sensor that will ultimately replace the Patriot radar, more quickly into the force? How are formations being designed, to kind of future alleviate that pressure with other capabilities that are coming online? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. We're really trying to attack this problem set, I would say, in three ways. One is through building out additional force structure. So, we are going to have a 17th Patriot battalion eventually. We're also building new capabilities like the M-SHORAD battalions or the counter-UAS, smaller batteries. The second thing we're really trying to do is discipline ourselves in terms of the demands for those kinds of capabilities as much as we can. I mean, obviously the enemy gets a vote. And then third, we're obviously very much trying to solve our recruiting problems, and we're particularly putting an emphasis on the 14 series because that is such a critical capability. We're definitely looking for opportunities as much as we can to pull capabilities like LTAMs to the left. As I said in the press conference earlier today, part of what we've got to do is, if we can't get some of these battalions back from, being forward deployed in theater, we're not going to be able to start, putting in the LTAMs, for example, or IBCS. And doing that will eventually expand our capacity even without growing the force structure. So there are a lot of interdependent pieces to that equation.
Okay, very helpful. How will the Army build on some of its success with recruiting in FY24, which saw numbers climb over previous years, so that's encouraging. What's still challenging about recruiting?
All of the things that were challenging about recruiting are still challenging. Still have historic low unemployment, still have 60% of kids going straight out of high school to college, et cetera, et cetera. I think, in terms of looking ahead for next year, one of the big things that we're going to be doing is getting our new enlisted talent acquisition specialists. I said enlisted recruiting specialists in my speech this morning for simplicity. We're still going to have 79 Romeos, but then we will also have 42 Tangos, which are talent acquisition specialists, and will be given slightly different training. That pipeline is going to start in the spring. We've been building it, but it's going to start producing, soldiers in that new MOS in the spring. So that'll be a big change. I think the innovation that we're doing with the 5 companies, one from each recruiting brigade around the country, we'll start to see, the results of some of the experimentation that they're doing. And the other thing I think you'll see is, continued revamping of our marketing campaigns. We have a great new digital ad, and I want to emphasize that the Army has really moved to digital. We are not doing a lot of TV ads. You'll notice we did not do an ad in this year's Super Bowl. Because in this fragmented information landscape, people's eyeballs are really much more in the digital space.
More likely to encounter that, yeah.
We have a great new ad called What's in a Name, or I like to call it Alvarez. Encourage you to seek that out on goarmy.com. We've been working on a new ad that really is aimed at non-Hispanic males who we think would be attracted to sort of combat MOSs that emphasizes the more kinetic part of the Army. And we're going to continue to start looking at creative partnerships to reach new audiences.
All right. Highlight some of the ways you're investing in people now, where you're seeing real benefit in recruitment, retention, quality of life. What are some of the areas the Army is still working to improve when it comes to better investment in people?
Well, I think we're continuing, we continue to run the AIM marketplace that allows, officers and families to have more agency in terms of, where they'd like their next assignment to be. We're continuing to support things like tuition assistance and credentialing assistance. We've really put our money where our mouth is on investing over $2 billion a year in barracks. That's both new barracks, restoration and modernization of existing barracks, and 100% funding of sustainment for barracks so that we don't see barracks, deteriorating further. And then, other things that I think are great for both men and women in the Army, 12 weeks of paid parental leave. We're really trying to do a bunch of things in the child care space because we know how important that is. You and I were talking about that earlier. So I think that's representative of the types of things that we're doing to invest in our people.
Talk about, we're in a continuing resolution at the moment. Talk about what impacts are already happening to the Army as a result of the continuing resolution, and what could potentially be at further risk if the continuing resolution were to extend, say, another 3 months or so.
Yeah, obviously a 6-month CR, is going to be harder for us than a 3-month CR. When you're, looking at a longer continuing resolution, we have about more than $8 billion worth of investment that would be delayed or straight up halted as a result of a 6-month CR. Within that we have 23 programs, for example, that are new starts that we're not going to be able to pursue. One example of that is we have a small counter UAS capability that we're aiming sort of for use at the company level. And that's a program that we won't be able to pursue until we get our appropriations. But it's also things like military construction, barracks, as I mentioned, and items in the recruiting space to include marketing.
Yeah, and you can see the construction costs continue to escalate as you wait. So, well, thank you so much, Secretary Wormuth. This has been wonderful talking, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your AUSA.
Thanks, Jen. Great to see you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Zazulowicz, Managing Editor with Military Times. Thank you for joining us for this AUA session on C4 dominance on the modern battlefield. This session is sponsored by CACI. It will be recorded and archived on defensenews.com. My guests today are retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Michael Nagata, Senior Vice President and Corporate Strategic Advisor for CACI, and retired Air Force Brigadier General Scott Stapp, a longtime industry hand and current senior advisor to the Aerospace Security Project at CSIS. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
And for enduring my semi-smooth intro there. So network access, security are so critical to the Army's efforts to field a truly connected fighting force, and making those networks secure is obviously a top priority. In this panel, we'll be discussing the role networks play, spectrum superiority, and access in contested or denied environments. First question, General, I'll throw to you. Stated simply, how does C4 dominance fit into overall military strategy today, and what does that look like, or how does that play out on the field?
Well, first of all, thanks for allowing me to be here. It's a pleasure to be with you both. This is a very important topic, but to answer your question, I'll give you the short version first. In my judgment, the nation or the actor that does the best job at embracing the power that digital technologies are giving the world of C4ISR, command, control, communications, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, they will emerge triumphant in future wars. All the actors or nations that do not, they will be the defeated nations. They will be the defeated actors. This new era of digital transformation that we are still hurtling through will define who are the winners and who are the losers for the foreseeable future. Finally, it begs the question, not just for the United States, but for the United States and all of its partners and allies around the world. While we may, in many cases, be wealthier or more advanced or more productive than some of our adversaries are we willing to go as fast and accept the risks necessary for embracing new technologies that are emerging at an ever-accelerating rate? Because our adversaries and our competitors certainly are.
That's such an interesting question of the necessity of speed, but also making sure that you're fielding systems that will do what you want them to do. Brigadier General Stapp, why don't you take that? Can you kind of talk to us a bit about, how you do speed, but also ensure you're not putting out kind of a piece of junk, so to speak?
Yeah, so my simplistic Air Force brain, when you talk C4ISR, really works in the OODA loop, right? I mean, if you really think about it, the observe, orient, decide, act. If you really think about the ISR piece, it's really about observing and orienting yourself. And the C4 piece is about deciding and making actions, right? And the whole goal is to really get inside your adversary's OODA loop. And what you've seen with technologies is they change. And I think what you really see, I mean, a commercial world is a really good example of command and control and kind of orienting yourself. Is if you looked 15 years ago, if you had a credit card and it got stolen by somebody, you might not be able to see the fraud on it for a month because nobody notified you. Now, you go shop somewhere you've never shopped before, and they notify you instantaneously of what's happening. So when you look at our ISR systems, and this is where I think it kind of gets interesting to General Nagata's point, is we have a gazillion ISR systems, but none of them are really connected together. Each service is kind of independent. We have defense agencies that do the same thing. If you really want to pull all this together and you want to get inside your adversary's OODA loop, you need to tie them all together. So a perfect example is you maximize your sensor, what sensors you're actually being able to use. So in a commercial industry, Waze has used every human being as a sensor, right? So they basically crowdsource everybody. If you're in the network and they say, hey, I want to know where a police car is, everybody who drives by it's in the network. It works on any device. Everything is networked together, but it's not isolated into single stovepipes. what we have to be able to do, I think, as a department, is integrate all those pieces. We don't even crowdsource our own activities. So we don't integrate all of our pieces in the ISR piece, so then you can make better decisions and act faster.
Sure. Would you like to add anything to that, sir? That balance of kind of speed and quality, or is it a trade-off to a degree?
It is a trade-off, but it's a trade-off that we need to approach with a view towards being risk tolerant. Unfortunately, in large governments, in wealthy governments, the larger they become, the more wealthy they become, the more reluctant to take risks they become because there's more to protect. And that's logical, it's understandable, it's human. But in the domain we're talking about, where the proliferation of new technologies and increasingly powerful technologies is accelerating. It's not a linear change. It's an exponential change. Any actor who is unwilling to take significant risk in embracing those technologies, recognizing some of them will fail, some of them will be disappointing, some of them may backfire. But aversion to risk is poison to the objective of embracing the future. And unfortunately, large governments tend to be bureaucratic. One thing I learned in my long military career, the one thing all big bureaucracies hate is taking a risk.
Sure. Do you envision this then as, something where you push 5 things out and you hope that one, will be the one that you can go forward to, but is it a matter of just trying different things simultaneously?
To a degree, but it's more than that. It's learning what doesn't work. There were plenty of things that I was issued over my military career that were advertised as being capable of certain things and turned out to be very disappointing, or in some cases just outright failed. But all too often what I saw was, well, we're just going to stop doing that, was a leadership reaction, as opposed to, well, that failed, but we probably learned something from it. Why don't we try again? Let's just try it a different way. Now, what I'm talking about are rather mundane examples, and I recognize that some of the failures in embracing a very powerful, very expensive technology may seem to be catastrophic, but I would argue it's still better than losing a war.
Sure.
And I think risk is part of that calculus, right? Which is we have always been a little bit of a risk-averse culture in the DoD. But when you talk C4ISR, I think honestly, I don't think this is a technology issue. I think it's less of a risk issue. There is still some risk. It's really a cultural issue, right? I mean, it is really interesting because C4ISR is really about integration of a lot of different capabilities. I kind of find it interesting that the department, when my first tour through the Joint Staff, I was working the JROC process, and we came up with 2 key performance parameters: interoperability and net centricity. And that was in 2003. And then I came back and was running the JROC about 11 years later, and we were waiving them all because we didn't understand we understood we needed to do interoperability, we understood we needed to do net centricity, and we had no idea how to actually make it happen amongst the services and the intelligence community so that you had an integrated whole. So the knowledge is there, the technology is there, but working across those service barriers and Title 10, Title 50 barriers has been an enormous challenge.
I would argue that's actually an enormous chunk of the risk that we're talking about. It's not a combat risk, it's not an operational risk, it's not even a strategic risk. It's the risk of, in my case, an Army officer reaching across the aisle to become interoperable with somebody from a different service or a different coalition military. And I have very vivid memories, not all the time, but too many times, being told, Nagata, what are you doing? You don't work with them. You're not from their formation. You shouldn't be doing that with them. And I'd always ask, well, why not? And he says, because we don't do that.
Right. Well, and I think that's a good point, because when you look at future, especially combat areas of operation, Pacific in particular, it's just massive, right? Yes. And when you look at things like Space Force, a lot of disaggregated satellites, intelligence community's already got satellites up, Air Force flying a lot of airplanes, Army needing to actually do a lot of operations too. All that stuff that's collected from the other services is not passed to the Army so that they can actually take advantage, utilize it, and do targeting. Yet it's all there, it's all available, it just fails to pass through the firewalls.
We were talking before the interview started about how whatever progress, and in some cases considerable progress, is happening within certain organizations. It could be the services, it could be a defense agency, it could be an intelligence agency, it could be a law enforcement organization, it could be just about anybody. But they're making real progress in embracing and adopting technology for their mission requirements. It's not hard to find that. What is much harder to find is an organization that is doing what I just said, but also reaching out to other organizations and asking them to participate in it. That's when the cultural antibodies tend to come out. But, well, wait a minute, why are you working with strangers? You should just be working with people from your own tribe. But that's antithetical to creating the kind of networked approach that we now need.
Well, sure. And just in general, just how we think. We build the best systems in the world, right? Whether it's satellites, airplanes, ground systems, ships. We build the best systems in the world. But when you start talking C4ISR and the things we're talking about, you're talking about systems of systems. You're not talking about individual systems. And we do not have anybody in the department who does systems of systems engineering across everything that is built. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah, kind of tied to that, General Legato, what do you view as the top priorities for kind of developing and implementing C4 dominance? If somebody came to you and said, here's what we need to do, and kind of have those, top priorities evolved over time, or are they pretty static?
I have two answers. One is kind of a variant of what I've just said. The department, really just the whole U.S. government, it's not just the military, because the military can't operate without a functioning intelligence community and many other, the State Department, you name it. The whole government has to get used to going faster and recognizing that the faster you go, the more accidents you'll have. But there's just no alternative to going fast because our adversaries are going fast. But the other one is just as important, and that is investing in the kind of training and education that the government, not just military, that the government workforce is going to need. How is the government going to ensure that the practitioners, whether they're logistical practitioners, aviation practitioners, special operations practitioners, how is the government going to ensure that when they get handed constantly morphing variants of increasingly powerful technologies, how is the government going to ensure they are capable of understanding and effectively employing these systems and capabilities that are constantly going to change while they're using them?
Turning to Ukraine, it's been such a test bed for different things we've seen, in the past two plus years, nearly 3 years now. General Stapp, why don't we start with you? What lessons has Ukraine kind of taught us about C4 and C4 dominance, if any, in your mind?
I think it has taught us that C4 can be extremely fragile if not actually built in a way that can be redundant. I think you see in that environment really attacks on the electromagnetic spectrum. So when you have very specific ways of either communicating or operating your systems, and that is the only way, GPS is a good one. A lot of people actually trying to deny GPS. You have to think of whole new ways to operate. So I think as you go forward. Now, again, I think Ukraine will be slightly different than some of the other things that we look at, but what it has taught us is a lot of lessons around multipathing your option space, right? So that you do not pick we've been really good at that, right? Precision-guided munitions, GPS. We've done that for just decades. And what our adversaries have seen is that is exactly how we do it. So they've concentrated on decades on how to deny that specific thing. So I think spreading out and looking at how do you think of new optionality and how you do command and control, how you actually do kill chain operations is absolutely critical.
Sure. General Legato, you want to add to that?
For me, I think the most important lesson I've seen come out of the Ukraine war is a very old lesson. It's one we've learned several times. We just have a tendency to sometimes forget it's a lesson we should remember. And that is, there's almost no limit to how imaginative people on the front lines can be if you allow them to be. As I've been watching, obviously from a considerable distance, some of the really inventive things that the Ukrainians, who inarguably are the weaker force, the inventiveness, the creativity that they're exhibiting, because literally their survival depends on it, has been, in many cases, breathtaking. They have defeated large Russian formations from time to time that arguably, if you did the classic, ammunition, troop strength kind of calculation, you would say there's no way they win this fight. But they have, because they have allowed their commanders in the field, and the commanders in the field have allowed their subordinates to try things at a blistering pace that previously they might never have tried before. Now that's actually a very old lesson. When command and control systems become too rigid and too autocratic, they stifle initiative, they stifle imagination. Right. We're seeing the positive opposite of that in the battlefield. What I don't know is, are we willing to do likewise?
Well, and I think your point earlier about risk calculus stuff, are we willing to do likewise before our backs are against a wall? Right? I mean, I think it is interesting with Ukraine, because when your back's against the wall and you have nothing to lose, the most dangerous man in the world is a man who has nothing to lose, right? And that's exactly where they are. So they can be very creative. They are going to take risks. They have no other options. We need to figure out how to harness that before you get your back against the wall. I mean, that is really what innovation is about.
And all of this is a leadership issue.
Mm-hmm.
The soldier, sailor, airman, marine on the ground or in the air, they don't make these decisions.
Yeah.
They don't decide how much freedom of action they get. It's the leaders that decide how much freedom of action they get. Yeah,
just kind of to both your points, just thinking to me, is wartime speed and agility replicable outside of wartime, And it's TBD, I guess we'd say.
Well, I think you can. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing now. I think some of this is a choice on how fast and how much we want to start pulling all these different pieces together. I mean, kind of back to C4ISR. That's really the piece. It's a it enables kinetics, but it's the upfront non-kinetic piece, right? Sure. And it's all about that interoperability and data flow. And back to kind of correlates to JADC2 of right data, right place, right time. Right. And tying all those moving pieces together.
Sure.
You're bringing back a fond memory of mine. This happened a couple of times while I was deployed. We were confronting the question over whether or not we can and whether or not we should connect a coalition network with a U.S. network.
Right.
I was on the side of, we need to connect these two things. Both of us will get better. Coalition forces will get better. The U.S. force will get better if we connect these things. And I wasn't the only one. Most of my colleagues that were in combat said the same thing. We have to connect these networks. But as soon as that proposal started rising higher in the food chain, we started getting, what are you, crazy?
Right.
We can't connect these networks. Something bad might happen.
Right. Well, and what's funny is you can't connect anything that you don't know about or aware of or take advantage of. So my last job in the DoD was I ran special programs for the Secretary of Defense. So you have insight into everything we have in the DoD, and what you find out is we intentionally do not let them know about each other, so there's no way to run that as a system of systems or have anybody prepare for combat with all those systems together, because we intentionally keep them all isolated. And so I think Secretary Hicks has really done a good job in SAP reform of looking at how do you break those stovepipes down. They've recognized that as a weakness, and they're trying to move forward because the risk of keeping everything isolated is actually greater than the risk of connecting it and having potentially an intelligence intrusion.
Has that risk and kind of that balance has changed with kind of the, what is capable or what is possible today versus several years ago? Because you can see the benefit of both. You want everything talking together, but then also
there are risks with that, right? But what I will tell you is I think, and you correct me. I think 10 to 15 years ago, we were this far ahead of our adversary. I think we have gotten closer to here, potentially here, and when you get to there, your risk back against the wall, your risk calculus must change. And so the idea of I used to tell people, I had a security guy in the special programs world whose goal in life literally was he would take every secret we had, stick it in a safe, spin the dial, eat the combo, and at the end of the year he'd go, look it, we had no leaks. And my answer was, we got nothing done, right? So there is this huge trade-off between you can only get so much done with 3 people, you can get a lot more done with 300,000 people, and there's got to be a balance in there that allows you to monitor security but progress as well. Because what your adversaries really want you to do is go slow.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there is one place where I think that it's pretty clear, at least it's clear to me, that an adversary is outpacing us. And in fact, the adversary or adversaries I'm going to talk about, they're not even state actors. There are actors around the world, particularly in the Middle East right now, that are much more aggressive in learning how to employ cheap, affordable, yet very effective autonomous drone technologies than we are.
Sure.
They are willing to do things right now. And I would make the argument that in a couple of cases, they're even more capable than we are at doing things in the unmanned space. Just because they're doing it, and they're learning by doing, while we're admiring it.
Well, and I think, I think you're dead nuts on it. I think some of it is that, and I think some of it is the services as a whole tended to want to build exquisite systems, right? Where you might be able to get 80% of the solution, 60% of the solution at like 10% or 20% of the cost, which means you get much larger volumes. You can do a bunch of different things, but we tended to go, my service, to the exquisite end of capabilities, which means you run out of money a lot faster, and you don't have enough mass. And if they do find ways to prevent those capabilities, you are really in a bad position.
Yeah. All right, let's get back on the C4 focus train here. Per kind of defensive, aspects of C4, what in your mind is kind of crucial for protecting, networks today?
Well, my view of the protection question is probably going to come across to a lot of the audience as old-fashioned, but I still look at this through an old-fashioned lens of 2 words, resilience and durability. If something is resilient, it can absorb an attack of some kind, a physical attack, an electronic attack, it doesn't matter, but it can still function. Something that is durable, when it's damaged, it can be very rapidly repaired. You don't have to send it all the way back to a depot back in the United States, and it takes 6 months for it to be repaired. You can repair it in the field. Sure. In my view, as military actors, both good and bad, become more and more dependent on increasingly exquisite technologies, the resilience and the durability of those systems, those platforms, those weapons is going to become more and more important. But it begs the question, when the government, anybody's government, goes to industry and says, we want this capability, are they also insisting that it has to meet this standard of durability and this standard of resilience? Sometimes the answer is no. And what it places the industry partner in the position of is kind of searching for the answer for that. When this gets hit, as inevitably it will, do you want it to be able to keep function, or do you just want it to be able to be rapidly repaired, some combination of both? Sure. And I've seen some of my colleagues have to prod the customer to even think about it.
Okay. Right. And so I think General Nagata laid it out that those are just absolutely critical elements. But I think the way we tend to attack it sometimes is we tend to get resiliency and security through separation of networks, right? So what you do is you go, well, I just have 100 different networks. So in my world, in the special programs world, we had like 5,000 different networks, right? Which is just nuts, right? None of them talk to each other. None of them pass data back to, if you're going to do C4, you have to have a seamless passing of information across multiple networks. And I think, 10 years ago, AI isn't what it is today. And I think what you do is with 5,000 networks, you actually have much more attack surface than if you integrate and have a single network and then use artificial intelligence to look for anomalous behavior within the network, and then point security in areas where they need to go to address those concerns. So I think, which gets back to the department has struggled to embrace AI, because it's not what everybody thinks it is, right? And it's really a tool that can be used in a variety of different ways. But it is amazing when we put artificial intelligence on certain networks, that it can see anomalous behavior instantly. Like someone who normally would never download a document, man, it just pings security and goes, this guy's never downloaded a document, we just got to download. Or they never printed something before, hey, you need to go see this guy. And it really vectors security in ways that have never been done before by just looking anomalous or changing behaviors.
Yeah.
Can I pick up on one thing you just
Please,
said?
sir, please.
I know one of the things you were hoping we would talk about is network modernization, so
Sure.
I see an opportunity to bring it up right now. As we've been talking for the last several minutes about how increasingly important these networks of bewildering variations are going to become, and increasingly going to become, it begs the question, how are we going to defend them? Are we investing in the ability to defend them? And that leads to a second question. As we work to defend them, does that include making sure they're up to date? If you do a survey across the US government, not just the US military right now, you'll find a lot of antiquated networks. So you can have an aspiration to use artificial intelligence or to do high-speed data processing or do a whole bunch of other things that are so tantalizing right now. But what your network engineer will tell you is, well, you can't do that here. Our network is 10 years old.
Yeah.
There's no way we do that on this
If
network.
not older, in some cases, yeah, absolutely.
Well, and what's funny with that is I think we fail to learn from past history lessons, right? I mean, I think a lot of what we do with networks right now is very similar to the Maginot Line, right? We are building these fortresses, we'll protect them, and what you find out is somebody who is fast, agile, and mobile will always find a way around that activity, as opposed to us taking a network approach that understands we're going to constantly be attacked, but we need to be fast, agile, and mobile and adapt to that and then counterattack.
Yeah. Kind of tied to that, the Army and the other services are so focused on preparing for, a dispersed West Pacific fight, where to varying degrees units will kind of have to be on their own. So kind of tied to that, how do you bring a C4 network into a contested or denied environment, and how does network both portability and mobility factor into C4 dominance, C4 defense, things of that nature when you're very, very far from the flagpole?
My answer to that, it may sound a little counterintuitive, but I think it's an old saying, training is everything. Mm-hmm. The harder you train now, the less you'll bleed in combat. Sure. And I want to be fair, there are some elements of the U.S. military, I'm sure that's true in some of our allied militaries, where they are ruthlessly testing the networks, the sensors, the C4ISR systems, putting them under enormous strain in exercises, trying to find ways to damage them, trying to find ways to harm them so that they can learn from that and make them more durable and resilient if we ever have to deploy them into combat. But these are expensive things, and it takes a lot of human skill that isn't necessarily native to government to do this kind of work. But if we do prioritize this, if we do prioritize ruthlessly testing our C4ISR systems, our ASI systems, under simulated combat conditions and see how they fail, see where they failed, and then what do you do when they fail, the better off we'll be in combat. If we fail to do that, what's going to happen is they'll fail in combat either because they don't work as advertised or because of effective enemy attack, and then we're stuck. We have no recourse now because we never put ourselves through the pain and agony of testing them while we were in training.
Ties back to your earlier point too. It's okay to break it.
It should
training,
be.
Right? Yeah.
It should
yeah,
be.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and I think you always have to be prepared to work in a disconnected ops kind of world. But I think in the world where we're talking about today is you should plan to be in a connected ops world, right? If you look at what Starlink has done, if you look at what SDA is doing with Transport Layer, I mean, typically if you have you won't make up, but really proliferated architectures with large numbers of satellites that have direct downlinks, for somebody to jam you, typically, they got to be in your footprint, which means they're super close to you. If they get super close to you, we have a different problem, right? Which is they should not be that close to us. And what we've done very well is in fighting and operations is keeping your enemy at some level of a distance. And so the idea of picking that up and starting to look at how do you do command and control from space, from other elements. But this kind of goes back to the service thing, right? I don't know if the Army is really looking at using SDA and what the Space Force is doing and using command and control from space to actually operate in areas where they think their forces might be in a disconnected situation. Because you have to train with it all the time. I mean, this is the one thing the military does really well is we train so that when you go into combat operations, it is natural reflex. We know what to do and we just go. But in some cases, what that trains out is innovation. We've done it so well, we can't pick up new ways of doing business.
Sure. You just reminded me of something I can't resist mentioning, and that is that cyber warfare and information warfare also happen in some of the networks we're talking about. And those are two arenas, cyber warfare and information warfare, where in some cases and in some places, the United States has some dominance, but there's plenty of locations or plenty of scenarios in both cyber war and information war, particularly information war, where we are not very good. And if it's a bit of an exposed flank for the United States, I would argue. We can be awesome at the application of network-centric warfare, for lack of a better term, on the kinetic side. But if we suck on the information and the cyber side, we may still lose.
Sure.
Well, and really, cyber conflict and information warfare is going on all the time below the surface. It is a constant battle that's going on. And kind of to your point, I think one of the things we struggle with it's a Title 10, Title 50 issue in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it is really interesting because sometimes information exists, isn't shared, there's intel gain loss issues, there's all sorts of stuff, but information is not equitably shared so you can understand. So the DoD does operational prep of an environment, somebody else does computer network exploitation. I mean, it's just, and we, from a cultural and a bureaucracy standpoint, have not come through all the terms of, if you're going to fight in a future conflict and you need all these pieces working together, how do you train to make them all work together?
Kind of keeping on that information, question and flow, what do you kind of see, General Nagata, as key elements to controlling information flow on the modern day battlefield?
I've come to believe there are at least two things that someone who wants to be successful in that arena has to focus on. One is be constantly present, be constantly communicating. Never have a quiet day, because your adversary isn't. Our adversaries are constantly filling the internet, the ether, with their message and their, what we would consider to be malign or false information, but it doesn't matter. It's still information out there that people are consuming. It's not that the United States does nothing. We're much better at this than we were, say, 10 or 20 years ago. But in way too many cases and in way too many places, our adversaries and our competitors are far more active in this arena than we are. So just volume, density of activity matters. It's not necessarily predictive of who eventually wins, but it's an enormous advantage if you're just putting out more content than your adversary is. The second one is speed. For many of our adversaries, not necessarily all of them, but for probably most of them, they go from thought to putting it online very, very rapidly. And they frankly don't care very much if it has unintended negative effects, collateral damage, what have you. How long does it take the United States government decide to conduct a cyber or information activity? Days to months to never. I personally am involved in information operations proposal that we debated in Washington, D.C. for more than 3 months and never got to a decision.
That seems to run so counter to, when you're talking about adversary states, you look at other states that don't have an activated NCO or junior officer corps, and every decision has to go up the flagpole when they're on the battlefield to their detriment. I think we saw that with Russia and Ukraine, especially early in Russia's campaign there. But you're kind of saying that when it comes to, IO or other kind of cyber things, it's almost like the adversary has a bit more of that ground level autonomy than U.S. forces, but I know you're probably also talking about state and non-state actors. So
right, they do, but it's more that they're just willing to take their lumps. They're more willing than we are to have a message something that they do in the cyber world go haywire. And I suspect the reaction is something like, well, too bad, it's very unfortunate, but let's keep doing it. Let's just do it better next time. Our tendency, frankly, is, okay, we're going to stop doing that. We're not going to do that anymore. That was too embarrassing. That didn't go the way I wanted it to, so we're just going to stop doing it. We tend to flinch from failure. Not in all cases. I want to be fair. There are some very enlightened people that I know still in government who are very aggressive about both cyber and information operations. But I think all of them would agree with me that they're having to fight their way through way too much bureaucratic resistance and reluctance and extended approval timelines. Whereas our enemies go from thought to action instantly. That is an advantage we cede to them.
Sure.
Well, and I think a lot of that is we're just operating in very different ethical frameworks.
We are.
Yeah.
I mean, that is which really is difficult for us, right? I mean, they don't have the same ethical issues of doing certain things or causing, human life. There are all sorts of different ethical standards across our adversarial groups and compared to the U.S., right? And if you look at something as basic as, we've set up this ethical AI forum, right? Which is AI needs to be ethical. How do you use it? How do you make sure it isn't intruding on people or putting in biases and you think our adversaries are doing that? Oh, there's no chance, right? I mean, they're going to use as much as they can to actually push our direction as possible. That is not going to be good for us. The other thing our adversaries have that we can't do in an open, society with is they throttle their internet, right?
Sure.
So as we push stuff out, they throttle it to the point that their population can only see what they want them to see, right?
Yeah.
We cannot do that. So everything comes in, we have to ingest, and then we have to kind of fight that off over time. I mean, it is just, and I think it is a core of completely different, whether you're autocracy or a democracy, ethical standards of human rights.
Yeah. We can't force massive companies in our country to do government work.
You're both absolutely correct, and we shouldn't. We don't want to become like our enemies.
Yeah.
But we also don't want to be so far behind our enemies that we end up losing.
Sure.
So I personally don't know where the happy middle is, but I know we're not at it. We're not at it.
Interesting.
Well, and what's interesting in the IO space or the cyberspace compared to kinetics is we typically test kinetics over and over and over again, and whether it's an SDB or a 500 pounder or a 2,000 pounder, you know what the blast radius is and the collateral damage. So we delegate down because we understand exactly what the effects are and the collateral damage is going to be. We have no idea sometimes in the cyber world what it's going to do, because once it goes in, you have no idea where it's going to proliferate to or migrate to. So the decision space goes to the very top because they're so concerned that they can't account for every possibility that is going to happen in that world that the answer becomes no.
Yeah, this is sharing you a conundrum I once faced. This was during the early wars of the campaign against the Islamic State. Most people listening to this probably remember that we had, the fall of Mosul, ISIS surging through Iraq was the strategic surprise, and so I had to rush my command back into Iraq. I hadn't personally been to Iraq for like 5 years at that point, but what some people remember, what many people never realized, was that when we completely withdrew in 2011, because all the military left, almost all of the U.S. intelligence community left, because we were their force protection. So when we got into Iraq and we were trying to assist the Iraqis to go back into combat, we had almost zero targeting intelligence because the U.S. intelligence community was not there yet. But what we were getting, believe it or not, was hundreds, maybe even thousands of Google pin maps from Iraqi citizens all over the country saying, there are some ISIS fighters here. And I remember turning to my Judge Advocate General saying, can I conduct a kinetic strike on a location that is a Google pin map provided me by an Iraqi I've never met? Yeah. I only share that, aside from the fact that it's an interesting story, I guess. I share that because this is the kind of actually foreseeable conundrum that we are going to encounter as the United States and our allies embrace more and more high technology systems. we're going to be discovering we can do something that previously I never thought I would be able to do. Now the question is, can I do it lawfully?
Right, and that kind of goes back to the original discussion on crowdsourcing, right? I mean, you're using stuff because every human being is a sensor and how they do it. And the ability, again, technologically, they know how to do it, right? We could do it and integrate everything we have across the entire DoD and the intelligence community into a network that decisions could be made over time of what data flowed. But we make the decision to not do it so you don't ever have to make the choice of what data flows.
Right. Kind of staying on that kind of cyber domain domain rather. Do you feel that protocols and programs are keeping up with the pace of technological change when it comes to things like cyber? Like can the government and industry keep up with just the evolution of technology that we're seeing, and kind of tied to that, how big of a role do you feel like AI is in that cyber dominance question?
Well, I'm going to focus on the first part of your question because sure. I still don't completely, I don't think I'll ever completely understand what artificial intelligence is. But the challenge that I think we're all going to confront is that because the technology-based capabilities we've been talking about and others that have yet to be invented but will certainly be invented, they're going to confront us with questions that, in my judgment, are foreseeable now. I'll give you one. It's kind of a common one. This is not original thought. As our autonomous capabilities become more and more exquisite, they can do their own targeting. They can do their own target identification. Are we going to let a machine decide to do something that previously we would only let a human being do because of our insistence? And this is not a criticism, it's an observation. Our insistence that there is an ethical human judgment to be made here. But I think it is inevitable that eventually we will find ourselves in a situation. I don't know when it will be, I don't know how it will unfold, but if we don't let the machine make a really important decision, we are going to lose. What do we do then? I probably come across as melodramatic like this, but I would argue that senior leaders, like I used to be, should be grappling with this now, not making it up as we go when it happens, because what I just said, in my judgment, is going to happen.
Right. That's a conundrum for both the cyber domain and every domain of warfare, right?
Yes.
Sorry, General.
Right. So kind of going to what you said, I mean, we deal with artificial intelligence every day, and we trust the machine in some way. So, I have an iPhone. Yep. I use my face to open it up. I trust that no other face can open up my iPhone, right? And it is using artificial intelligence and algorithms to actually do that. What we look at automated target recognition, I mean, I say it, there's billions of different faces, and yet it is very, you can occasionally have it happen, but it is unbelievably rare for another face to open it up. When you look at weapon systems, they come off an assembly line. They all look the same. Being able to do automated target recognition in that should just be an absolute no-brainer, right? And I think where you're getting to, which is, when do you let the machine make the decision, or when do you trust the machine that he goes, hey, it is this threat, push the button, right? And do it fast. And what I tell you is, and we've looked at this in defensive situations, where if you have incoming weapons and you can't tell if it's blue or red, is you can have automated target recognition tell you, each person makes a decision and punches it, but when it gets overwhelmed and it's huge, large salvos, the only way to defend yourself is to let the machine take it over and just do it on its own, right? Because humans will just get overwhelmed. Where that decision point is, we're going to have to train to that, right? And that's part of the issue. We're even struggling to train to let AI go, hey, you should go do this, push the button, right? Where the human is really just on the loop and is basically the final decider on what the machine's doing. But
yeah, okay. A few more questions here. We got a few more minutes. Kind of something that we touched upon before, but one that was on our list. What do you see, General Nagata, kind of as the main challenges to network modernization for the military in general? Is that mainly a speed thing, or are there other challenges you kind of are tracking as well?
It is certainly a speed thing, but I think the largest obstacle is that I need to be careful when I say this. There are some very enlightened leaders that I know still serving, both civilian and military, who absolutely understand what I'm about to talk about. They understand better than I do. They understand the absolute imperative to constantly modernize, because you don't just modernize once, you endlessly modernize, to relentlessly modernize the networks that we are going to become increasingly dependent on. Those people exist. There aren't enough of them. There are too many places and too many cases across the U.S. government writ large, not just DOD, who don't understand what the consequences are of failing to modernize their networks. I mean, pretty much everything we have talked about during this hour, one way or another, cannot function without being able to rely on a stable, effective, secure, reliable network, and a modern network that modern software and modern hardware can operate on. And that gap is a strategic threat, in my judgment, to our future effectiveness.
Do you think the kind of endless need to keep on top and keep modernizing?
Yeah, there's no end to it.
For C4 systems, yeah. But do you feel like that is something that realization is growing across the defense enterprise?
It is growing. It is growing. I don't think it's growing fast enough. It's because frankly, it's countercultural. Most of the people I served with tended to focus, because it's our cultural nature, on things that go boom. And hey, I like things that go boom too. I have a fixation on certain things that go boom myself. But I had to learn. That, and this is decades ago, and it's even more true now, actually information and data are increasingly becoming the deciding factor on who wins a fight, not how exquisite our weaponry is. Don't get me wrong, I love exquisite weaponry. I would rather have exquisite weaponry than not have it. But if I have better information than my adversary has, he can't win.
Well, and I think what that information does is make your exquisite weaponry more effective,
yes.
Right? So I think what we have to get out of is building boutique and stovepipe, basically IT systems and C4 systems, right? And they need to be interoperable. But if you're going to build interoperable systems, then there's a lot of training that goes with it, because the weakest link in any computer system is the human being, yep. Right? The guys who want to put their password as password or 123, right? There are systems that if we train our folks and they get used to it and they don't figure it's too cumbersome, but if you have to log in with a biometric thumbprint, then you have to type in a password, then you have to show your face. Triple redundancy is like non-hackable, right? But then they can't cheat and follow different things. And it is interesting in our world that most systems that get basically corrupted is somebody clicking on a link they shouldn't click on, right? In adversary countries, they shoot you. So people don't click on links they shouldn't click on, because bad things will happen. And so the training of your system is designed for work. Don't be clicking and touching anything without the knowledge and understanding. And all that is just as massive training. Just like you wouldn't send somebody out an F-22 or an F-35. You wouldn't send them out in a Army weapon system without massive training for fear they might shoot somebody, right? IT systems are becoming that.
That's right.
Sure. Kind of a wrap-up question here. Again, a bit general, but germane. When you look at portable and mobile C4 networks, ones that will be perhaps deployed far, far from home, far from the flagpole in some future conflict, what do you see as kind of key to keeping those C4 systems secure and trustworthy? Is it mainly zero trust? Does it go beyond that?
Certainly zero trust matters, but it's beyond, the requirement's much larger than that. And I'm not the last thing I am is a technologist, so I barely understand what the words that are going to come out of my mouth here. But how do you reduce the likelihood that your mobile network, your mobile sensor, your mobile communication system will not be identified, detected, and targeted by an adversary. You know, the saying that's become pretty common in DoD these days, if it radiates, it dies. It's true. Yep. We're seeing that in Ukraine. You radiate, you die. Yep. And I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect solution for that. My hope is there are a bunch of people in government who are asking a bunch of people in industry, find a solution to that. How it's make the impossible possible. I have to radiate, but how do I not die? So that's one. The second one is that, and in a way I've already talked about it, we have to adopt a culture of ruthless experimentation. Because not just what I just talked about, but there's so many other things that are head-scratching problems. They might be technology problems, they might be ethical problems, they might be procedural problems. They're head-scratching problems because we're having to embrace an entire new world of capabilities into a traditional military or traditional government structure. What does it take to do that? Or more precisely, how do leaders have to change how they view the world to do that? Because if we approach this like it's 1975, we're just going to fail.
No, yeah, so I think from a vulnerability standpoint, I don't think it matters where you are in the network, right? So if you have your phone here, the likelihood of it getting hacked is no different than if you were in Ukraine, it's going to get hacked, right? Because it's really about the network and the system that it's operating, which gets back to IT and network security. And once they get in it, losing an asset is a different issue if they actually capture you and pull it. Sure. But I think this is the standard chess game they've played all along with electronic warfare and electronic countermeasures, electronic countermeasures, and right? Is that in comms, you're right, if you radiate, you die. So they start to go to things like laser comm, right? They start to go to different methodologies, whether you go across and up so that nobody can detect you, you go to narrow beams. But it is a huge technology issue that, what really resonates is what you said about really C4, ISR, and IT is not what is sexy in the Department of Defense, right? It is weapon systems that create kinetic action, that close kill chains. Right. And what we're starting to see is whether it's contested logistics, the things that used to not be critical are starting to become the critical elements to close the warfight. And they're going to have to do a lot more attention to those so that your toys that actually create kinetic action can be effective. I mean, otherwise, you're lost. It's going to have to be a whole.
Or just survive.
Or just survive, either way.
Do you think, like decoys, when it comes to if it radiates, it dies, do either you see, I know there's been some recent Army exercises where they put out a decoy. I think at the National Training Center, they had a brigade running through there, and they had kind of a decoy emitting stuff. Is that enough, or is that the kind of technological fix that in your mind, like the adversary will just figure out it's a decoy? And
it's a step in the right direction, no doubt. And I want to be fair here. All the services, probably all the intelligence agencies, there are enlightened people in all of them who are trying new things in new ways, with new approaches, with new technologies. So there's certainly progress being made. My concern is it fast enough? Is it good enough?
Sure. Because
there's no constraints on the way our adversaries and competitors are experimenting with them. Mm-hmm. But it always reminds me of something we all learned in school. It was when after Thomas Edison had invented the light bulb and he was being showered with praise for inventing the light bulb, he got sick of it after a while. He started telling people, I didn't invent the light bulb. And they would say, oh, Mr. Edison, how can you say that? You invented the light bulb, you changed the world. And he would say, no, I invented 900 ways not to have a light bulb. The only thing you people remember is my last experiment that succeeded. The only thing I remember is if I hadn't failed 900 times, you wouldn't have a light bulb.
Well, I think that's a perfect. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add that I think there will never be any silver bullet solutions, right? You're going to have a layered approach with multiple different ways to do it. And, I love what you said about we have to be less risk averse, more willing to move forward fast, take failures, move forward. Right now, when you have a failure, your program gets shut down for X period of time till somebody does an investigation. But I really loved what you were saying about that risk aversion is what is holding us back. And then you can come up with layered approaches because you don't want a single silver bullet because it allows your adversary to focus too much on that anyways. So,
That's all the time we got today. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Lieutenant General Nagata.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Brigadier General Stapp. And thank you to our sponsor, CACI. And we appreciate you watching.
Hello, I'm Leo Shane from Military Times, Deputy Editor, and with me here is former Army Secretary, former Congressman Pat Murphy. Welcome. You're now affiliated with Face the Fight. Talk to us about that initiative and what that means, what you're doing to help prevent veteran suicide.
Sure, Leo. First of all, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. When I joined the Army at 19, I never did I ever think I would be a professor at West Point, deployed to combat twice, be a member of Congress, and obviously helped lead the Army in the Pentagon. But throughout my time there, when I lost 19 men in our unit in Iraq, one of those was he took his own life. And when you look at, we've just got done the longest wars in American history, right? So the forever wars are a thing in the past, but for over 20 years, we had 10x losses to suicide versus combat. And it's preventable. And so I'm now the honorary chair of the Face the Fight initiative. We've already raised over $80 million, led by USAA, Humana, and over 250 partners to really get rid of this stigma that mental health and physical health go hand in glove. It's incredibly important, and there's so much more that we could do.
Okay, so we'll talk about the partners in a second, but let's start by talking about that stigma, because you and I have talked about this for years. This idea that it's not macho, or it's not something that someone should, not something that the military does. When are we going to get past that, and how do you get past that? Because this is, I don't want to say it's ingrained, but it's such a long-term problem that we've had. How do you get past that? How do you break through?
Yeah, I think part of it's you have to show what right looks like, right? And so letting people know, like, listen, when I was at the gym this morning, PTing, doing some CrossFit, people see on my social media at Patch Murphy PA, like, I'm doing that stuff, right? I personally have to do a better job of letting people know, like, hey, I go to counseling, right? I have a quarterly check-in with a counselor, because mental health is just as important as your physical health, right? And if you're not acting on that, if you're not being proactive, when things go downhill, which they do for everybody, everyone has setbacks in their life, you want to have that basically base of knowledge and that relationship that you can go in and lean on someone to make sure you get through it.
Okay, so with Face the Fight, what does that look like in terms of those partnerships and everything? How are you doing that outreach? How are you bringing folks in?
Yep, we launched about a year and a half ago in April at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with Wayne Peacock, the CEO of USAA, with the CEO of Humana, with these incredible, the Endeavor Foundation, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and these real leaders. And it's really a private sector-led initiative to let people know that there's so much more we need to do to face the fight. So we have a website, wefacethefight.org, but also it's we're raising money and we're giving it to evidence-based practices, people that are top of their world-class researchers at places like University of Texas, Austin. And we're giving, tens of millions of dollars to make sure we're researching best practices, evidence-based practices, to let other folks know what more they can do to be part of the solution. Leo, you know as well as I do, we've asked less than 1% of our nation to serve in the longest wars in American history, but it takes the other 99% to let people know mental health is critically important and you can make a difference. We lost over 125,000, my brothers and sister veterans, since 9/11, since we were attacked on that day. There is so much more we need to do and let people know that there's resources out there. Yes, 411 and things that you can call in, but being proactive out there and letting them know what more we got to do as a nation, what more we got to do as veterans, what more we got to do as a society to make mental health just as important as your physical health.
I think that private sector aspect is very interesting, because we have seen a lot for EA. We've seen a lot from the Defense Department really focused on this, but to take it to the private sector, to go outside and say, hey, veteran, hey, former military member, it's okay from our viewpoint too, right?
Right, exactly. And the VA's doing a phenomenal job. They're doubled down on it, right? And listen, when I helped, lead the Army, we had embedded behavioral health teams where we had basically social workers or psychologists, embedded in the battalion level, doing PT with them. So if they ever had to grab them afterwards, if they want to go see someone, we made it easy and accessible. That's positive. But when you talk about every year, there's over 200,000 active troops that become veterans, and also military spouses. We need to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks. Transitions, Leo, are incredibly hard. And that's when people fall through the cracks. And that's why we let people know, hey, listen, what are you doing to go be a part of a different team, a different tribe? You're always going to be, like I served in the Army. I always say America's varsity team, I'll be a soldier for life. but I'm not in the 82nd Airborne Division anymore, right? So when I go back home to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, that's why I joined a CrossFit box. That's why, I work out at a Crunch, gym, right? And what are you doing to keep up your mental health, your physical health? Because they do go hand in glove. And to let people know that they can be part of this organization to help others, to get the word out there that there's folks out there in the private sector, and yes, in the Army, in the VA, but the majority of veterans are not in the VA. So if you're not in the VA, there's private sector folks that are there to help and to make a difference.
Okay, so if I'm an individual who's interested in this, what does that look like for me? How do I, maybe as a non-veteran, maybe as someone who's a family member, how do I help? I mean, do I need to be taking classes? Do I need to get into in-depth research or clinical stuff, or what can I do to stem veteran suicide?
Well, first off, anyone can sign up, including veterans can sign up, but wefacethefight.org. So I would say that's number one, sign up, find out what's available to you. Number two is, I tell people, you should go to a counselor at least once a quarter, if not once a month, right? Even if you don't have PTSD, TBI, whatever, right? Because, again, listen, I'm a big believer in post-traumatic growth, right? And, if I wasn't, in the invasion of Iraq with the All-American Division, I would never have been a member of Congress. I would never have been, the 32nd Undersecretary of the Army, et cetera, right? And now teaching at Wharton and being a venture capitalist and doing what I'm doing, right? But I would say to you, and when I say to my brothers and sister veterans, be part of the solution. And even if you say, hey, man, I'm good, Murph, I'm busy, right? Take the time now to make sure that you are good. Take the time now to say, hey, I at least have a baseline of folks. I have someone I can connect with. And then reach out to your brothers and sisters that you serve with, right? Because they are falling through the cracks. We know it. You know it. When you have over, a dozen and a half veterans at least that take their own life every day, that's wrong. We got to do better as a nation. We got to do better as a brother and a sister. We got to do better as part of that 99% didn't serve to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, uncle, hey, aunt, hey, cuz, are you going to see counseling? Are you just, it's most of the time it's free. If you want to do it in the private sector, whatever, we will provide you resources to make sure that we don't leave you behind, because that's the ethic that we believe in, that we leave no one behind. And there's too many that are being left behind, and there's too many private sector solutions out there that we got to do a better job.
Okay, so where do we want to see a year from now this initiative be? What are you hoping to do? Is it a matter of getting more individuals in, more companies in? Is it a matter of just touching more veterans with those outreach efforts?
Yeah, listen, that's what is great about this initiative. We have a return on investment. We're telling people we want to cut it by at least 50% within 10 years. But again, it's not going to happen overnight, right? But you got to make a difference now. And what I tell people is that the military's been a great agent for social change, right? For good. We are a force for good. We democratized education after World War II. In the middle of the Korean War, we desegregated the military. We repealed the International Hotel, ushered in marriage equality. What's the next frontier? I don't know. The military's not a social experiment. But you know what they are? They develop leaders of character for a lifetime of service. Show other Americans that physical health is just as important as your mental health. Get rid of this stigma. Let people know what's out there, the resources out there, and let people know that you're doing what you need to do to take care of yourself and your family, because suicide is preventable. We got to do a better job. And that's why this private sector-led initiative, Face the Fight initiative, is so critically important. That's why it's an honor for me to chair it.
All right, well, look, I hope we're back here again next year talking about how the numbers went down and a lot of the lessons learned that you've got and ways we can successfully move forward. But listen, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.